I'll tell you what,
It's not like the olden days.
I'm Rosie.
I'm Jake.
And this is our podcast on the adaptations of the Chronicles of Narnia. As most people know, the Chronicles of Narnia is a series of books written by C.S. Lewis in about the 1950s. And the one that most people have read or had read to them, even if they didn't particularly want to carry on and read the rest, is The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which is one of my favourite books, actually. Do you like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Jake?
Yes, I haven't read the Narnia books very much. We've twice read them out loud, and I've read them once to myself, so I don't have a lot of opinions about them. I just find the last battle rather dissatisfying, with its plot threads getting all closed up by the world ending. I think that's a bit of too much of a fix-all. That's my main memory of the series.
Well, I've read them quite a lot, and I agree with you about the last battle. The thing is that he's trying to tell everyone that they're going to go to heaven if they're good, and they're going to go to hell if they wear lipstick and go and muck about in America. It's all a great big, massive religious propaganda, really, isn't it?
Heaven, the ultimate fix-all.
But anyway, it was adapted for television and was on CBBC in the time when Jake can remember and I can't.
Yes, it was adapted into 3 series in 1988, 1989 and 1990, and they were all on Sunday tea times, which means about 4:30 on Sundays, and they were obviously supposed to be family viewing rather than come home after school and watch it while having your after school biscuits. Watch it as a family on Sunday afternoon.
There were 3 series in which 4 of the 7 books were adapted, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go. The other 3 books, including The Last Battle, aren't as adaptable. And of course, there have also been 3 movie adaptations in the not olden days after 2000, which was a pretty pathetic attempt to adapt the whole series and rival Harry Potter, which tells you how long ago it was now. So we'll talk about those, and we'll talk about the CBBC adaptation. Let's talk about CBBC first. Let's state right now that both Jake and I think that it is much, much, much better than any of the film adaptations.
Yes, it's interesting. When the first film was not yet out on DVD, so I suppose it's probably, late 2005, when it was around but not available, they brought out the BBC adaptations on DVD, and I was going around saying, oh, look what they're trying to flog, that old crap, just cash in on the new movie. But then when Rosie got hold of the DVDs, I quickly realised, oh, they're much better than the new movie adaptations, and that became even more evident with the second and third movies in the series, which are worse than the first. But I hadn't come away from my childhood when I was 5, 6 and 7 with a very good opinion of Narnia, very good memories of Narnia on the CBBC, and I can see why, really. It's quite complicated for a very young child, and it's quite scary in many places. I was very sensitive about things on the television. I still am in some ways. I remember being very frightened by The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe when I was 5, where the White Witch is calling up all the ghouls and demons, and they're coming screaming out of the forest, animated. They are absolutely scared me to death, that. And I hadn't really understood much of the Prince Caspian, Dawn Treader and Silver Chair series, so I hadn't come away feeling that good about Narnia as a programme on CBBC, but looking back at it now, I do feel good about it.
I used to rent from the library. I suspect Mummy paid for it when I was about 9 or 10, a year or so after I'd been read The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe at school and enjoyed it.
Did you have to pay for it?
Yeah, you had to pay £1.
Wow, they didn't trust you to bring the videos back, did they?
A double video, by which I mean it had one of those double-sized cases, and there was a video in one side and a video in the other side, of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and it was these 6 episodes split up into 2 hour and a half without the recaps and the music in between. And I absolutely loved watching that, and I gave the library £1, or Mummy gave the library £1 quite a lot of times, and I used to sit and watch it and think it was absolutely marvellous. And I think one reason why I liked it is that it was very, very true to the book. And I've always wanted from an adaptation to be able to just see the book on screen, and this is very much what you get with the BBC Chronicles of Narnia.
I love the presentation style of the BBC series as kind of like a living play with the fun costumes, not necessarily meant to look that realistic, quite stylized, quite accessible. You can see the effect they're going for. And some of the performances, particularly the brilliant Barbara Kellerman as the White Witch, very over the top, very out there, very stylized in many ways. I think a marvellous way to bring the book to life. Perhaps I didn't engage with that aspect of it either much when I was young.
The 4 children, Peter, Susan, Edmund and Lucy, are all fine actors for Sunday afternoon CBBC. I don't think they'd have got the part in Hollywood. Or am I being harsh?
No, I don't think you're being too harsh. There's a certain truth to their performances that I don't think they were looking for in the Hollywood casting for the movies when they just wanted children who said W instead of R.
There's an interesting sort of chat with them grown up on the DVD bonus features where they're saying that they were surprised that the 4 of them got cast out of the 2 remaining quartets, if you see what I mean. They thought the other children had more what we call BBC ability, don't we? They thought that they looked a bit more attractive. I'm really struggling for words here, but Sophie Cook or Wilcox, I can't remember which is which.
I think Wilcox is Lucy.
Well, she says that the other girl who might have been picked to play Lucy was very tall and thin like she is in the illustrations. She was rather a dumpy child, and she says that herself. I hope she won't mind me paraphrasing. So you see what I mean. They didn't feel that they had the most BBC ability, but obviously the casting director thought that they did. And yes, they're okay. You certainly get the idea that Peter's the oldest and he is taking responsibility for the rest of his family, and Edmund's a bit nasty and picks on Lucy because she's the only one who's younger than him, and Lucy's innocent and imaginative and compassionate, and Susan is there to make up the numbers, really, isn't she?
Yes.
When we watched the DVD recently, you remarked that she was very forgettable. I said that I always remembered Susan because when I did first watch it out of the library for £1, she was the one that I thought actually looked like I'd imagined her in the book, which backs up the point that Sophie Wilcox makes, that they don't look like the most traditional Pevensey children, except Susan, who must be Sophie Cook. And Peter, by the way, his name's Richard Dempsey, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Edmund is called Jonathan R. Scott, which is quite funny because I was at school with a Jonathan Scott, but perhaps no one else thinks that's funny. Who else is in it? We've mentioned Barbara Kellerman. The other really main characters would be the Beavers. Let's talk about them.
The appearance of the Beavers with their great cumbersome costumes is very, I've said stylized, I've said out there. What do I really mean? Surreal. And apparently one of the things C.S. Lewis once said about adapting Narnia is that he didn't think it should be done because the animals couldn't be brought to life on screen properly, convincingly, or in the way he'd imagined them. But I do think the beaver costumes fit in very well with the style of presentation in the BBC version. And yes, they're terribly cumbersome, and the beavers can't really walk in them. The bit where Mr. Beaver's stabbing at an animated ghoul or something with a spear is rather laughably bad to look at, but as I say, they slip into the style perfectly, and I think they both do a very good job in the roles. We know Mr. Beaver is played by Kerry Shale, who's a Canadian actor who's been in quite a few British things with an North American accent, and Mrs. Beaver makes us laugh. Can't remember what her name is, actress. when she's talking about her sewing machine. She doesn't want the White Witch fiddling with her sewing machine, and we know the White Witch isn't interested in her sewing machine. They both do a great job, I think.
Yes, we were chuckling when he was going to investigate the noise outside. Carrie Share as Mr. Beaver saying, "Oh, don't worry, no one will see me." And then he's shuffling along in this massive, huge beaver costume, and you say, "Yes, he's not at all conspicuous."
They must have known that was going to look funny on screen, surely.
Well, I never noticed that when I was a child because I was so caught up in the magic.
Yeah, it doesn't take away, as you say, from the magic at all. It's presented very, very well, so the rudimentary costumes really don't detract from it at all.
The way C.S. Lewis imagined the talking animal is more like the 21st century film adaptations, isn't it? More like that. Of course, he had no notion you could do those kinds of effects.
Yes, he would have been thinking more along the lines of it would look like the way they do the Pegasus and the flying leopard and things in the BBC version, which is layering some traditional animation, cartoon animation, over the film, which kind of is a style clash and doesn't look convincing, as it were. But on the other hand, it really doesn't matter, because Narnia is supposed to be this fantasy world, rather unlike our own. So why on earth shouldn't some of the creatures be cartoons? The Pegasus, the Winged Panther, again, does not detract from the magic at all for me.
I can't remember the names of any of the other actors I want to talk about any more than I can remember Mrs. Beaver's name. I can't remember it either, apart from the Aslan man, but let's leave him till last, shall we? There's also Tumnus the Fawn.
Oh yes, a very nice job, that.
Nothing else to say about that, and Morgrim, the wolf who works for the White Witch.
Now his performance is very abstract, very kind of pantomime-y, rather like Barbara Kellerman, so it serves as a good side-by-side with her. And yeah, I think he does a very good job with what he's got to do and how he's presenting it, appropriate to the style of the show. He's called Martin Stone.
Yeah, well remembered. What is quite interesting is that he's played by two actors, one of whom is actually a wolf or a dog who looks very like a wolf. And he will run around and stuff, and then when he needs to speak, it will sort of morph into Martin Stone with a wolf costume on.
So you can imagine the beavers and other animals can do that as well if they feel like it. Reminds me of the bumps on the Ink Thief.
Yes, I can see exactly what you mean. And Morgrim's companion is a very similar looking dog, and another thing that was quite amusing was when he went to tell the White Witch that Morgrim had been killed. And he was just sitting there with his great big puppy dog eyes looking up at Barbara Kellerman, and she's going, "Morgrim, dead!" And you're like, yeah, he's just told her that. He obviously hasn't.
She brings it to life so well and makes us buy into it with her wonderful, over-the-top pantomime performance. Brilliant.
And that's really all the main cast apart from Aslan, isn't it?
Well, there's also Big Mick.
Oh yes, sorry, Big Mick.
The White Witch's dwarf. And he does have a name, but they don't mention it in the BBC series. I can't remember what it is at the moment.
Neither can I haven't read the books for a while.
It's something like Knickerbrick, because Knickerbrick is supposed to be his descendant, because they're both evil dwarfs, but I can't remember what it is. But we like Big Mick, don't we? Especially having known him from the Black Adder as Jack Lodge, which we'll also talk about Black Adder one day, definitely. And he does some nice, sinister northern dwarf work. You can tell that he's kind of like the demon on the White Witch's shoulder, if you like, telling her things she doesn't necessarily want to hear at times, telling her things that perhaps her other subjects wouldn't dare to tell her. "Are you my counsellor or my slave?" she says to him at one point. So he certainly adds a lot to the programme, I think. And so did the BBC, obviously, because they brought him back as Trumpkin, a good dwarf that time, in the other two series, rather than casting him as Knickerbrick, which is a less meaty role, but is supposed to be the descendant of the dwarf he's already played.
Aslan, then, is God, which is why he's in all three series, and he is a massive, great, big, well, he's not that big, but he's a larger than the average lion, I should say, puppet.
Yes. And if you look at the special features, you can see things like looking at the puppet on, is it Blue Peter or Tomorrow's World, or possibly both?
I seem to remember him being on Blue Peter, and I actually felt a little unnerved seeing the puppet moving and blinking and not having any personality, because we're so used to seeing Aslan speaking and interacting with actors, voiced by Ronald Pickup, I believe.
Yes, and the puppet can walk around with two people inside it.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's not very quickly, and it can't run and bound and leap when it's come back to life after the stone table incident, so it has to fly instead, which is perfectly reasonable. It's God, he can fly.
Presumably. And I always thought, as a child, it was a very excellent interpretation of Aslan. He's just sort of authoritative yet gentle, isn't he?
Yes, he's very well done. And Liam Neeson in the films, just sidetrack for a moment, does that as well. I used to be absolutely scared to death of the Aslan puppet, even though he wasn't threatening or anything. I used to have nightmares with lions in them, I'm sure because of him.
Oh, but he's God. You're supposed to absolutely love Aslan, and reading the books is supposed to make you want to be a religious fanatic so you can meet Aslan in heaven, but obviously that didn't work on you.
No, I don't think I really got the symbolism at the time. One thing I always say about Aslan, which is true, the puppet's mouth moves, but it doesn't move to form words like Liam Neeson's CG Aslan does. And what they do, which I actually think is a really good effect, is they have the puppet mouth move and the soft lion, not exactly roar, but lion vocalization coming out. And in that, you hear the voice of Ronald Pickup, the voice of God. So it's not trying to match the mouth movement, but the mouth moves and then the comes out, and in it you hear the voice of God in your head, which I think is a very nice effect and the best thing you can do with the puppet with its limited mouth movements. And they don't always throughout the series put the lion vocalization in.
They can't be asked.
Which I think is a shame because it's a good effect and it's one they should have stuck with. One thing I always say about the three series of BBC Narnia is that Aslan seems to take on a different part of God in each one. Obviously, in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, he is the Son, God the Son, as he has the sacrifice of his life for the sins of others, or another, Edmund in this case, and then the resurrection and the glorious beating evil to death afterwards. Then I say that in Prince Caspian and the Voyage of the Dawn Treader series, he is God the Father, because he's a very elusive figure, very mysterious, just turns up now and then to make sure you're being loyal to him and believing in him and having faith in him, but not really doing anything active in that one. And then I say that in the Silver Chair he's the Holy Spirit, because he's actually coming and appearing to Jill and later Eustace and Puddleglum, and actually actively telling them, showing them, instructing them what to do to make things right in Narnia. Which I think is quite an interesting observation, and it's true of the books as well. Obviously, there are other books that Aslan is in, so it doesn't so neatly be that he's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in three separate things in that case, as he is in the three BBC series.
Yes, in Prince Caspian, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, are two things in the books rather than one series. So yes, that does work out more neatly for the BBC series.
I wonder if when they were planning to put Caspian and Dawn Treader together, they were saying, well, obviously the plots run on from each other, so that will work. And the symbolism of Aslan and the Father will go from one to the other quite neatly as well, so that's another good reason to do it. Or maybe it was just luck. One thing I promised to reveal to Rosie, and now you, during this podcast, was the two passages that I feel are the very best in the BBC Narnia series. The ones that I find the most effective, the most interesting, the most atmospheric. And one of those two passages is the first couple of episodes of The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, where we get introduced to Narnia. We're not quite sure what's going on. Everything seems nice and cosy with Lucy and Mr. Tumnus, and then all the threat is revealed. Edmund meets the White Witch.
And we've heard about the White Witch from Tumnus, so we know she's evil. And then Edmund's in Narnia, and we're like, oh, what's going to happen to Edmund in Narnia? And then we're like, oh, Shig, the White Witch.
Great cliffhanger for the first episode there, and you can try and work out her motives for when she's being nice to Edmund, when she's not being nice to Edmund. So I think I would say the first 2 episodes, basically, of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, where things are a bit of a mystery, the atmosphere's building, the plot's building, the tension's building. That's number 1 of my 2 favourite passages of the BBC's Narnia.
I've just remembered that one bit I do particularly like when things are getting introduced. It's the scene where Peter and Susan speak to the professor because they're worried that Lucy is going completely mad. I thought that the way Susan was reacting to the professor saying, well, she's probably telling the truth, was very good. She was looking over at Peter like, what's he saying this for? Isn't it what he's supposed to be saying? He's a nutter. It's being possibly coming across as a little ungenerous towards the child actors, but no, I do think they do a good job, and that's one of my favourite bits, Susan reacting to the professor.
I like that scene as well. Professor's very well done in that. Michael Aldridge, I think, was his name. Quite famous British actor, playing eccentric men, old men.
And the line's taken pretty much from the book, which is one reason why the scene's very successful. It's one of the many scenes I thought compared very unfavourably in the film adaptation, but let's not go too much into that now. So now let's talk about Series 2. When I got the DVD, and it said on the front, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Silver Chair, my first thought was, oh, they made 4 series, did they? And then I found out, perhaps Jake told me, or perhaps I read it in the DVD, it was actually only 3 series, and Prince Caspian and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader was 1 series, so then my next assumption was that they had 3 episodes each. But that's not it either. Prince Caspian is just 2 episodes. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is 4 episodes. And that's probably why little Jake didn't really get to grips with Prince Caspian and completely understand it.
I now remember when I was young, seeing them going back to the rail station in their own world in episode 2 of that series and thinking, oh, that was over very quickly. Normally when we settle down to watch a series, it goes on for several weeks. It only started last week. And then, of course, they start going into the painting with Eustace, Lucy and Edmund do at the end of the episode. You think, oh, right, okay, that's how they're carrying on this series.
Can you remember the name of the boy who plays Caspian?
Oh, it's something French. Jean-Marc Perrault, I think.
I think they cast him because they'd already got Timothy West for older Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and they thought he looked a bit like him, and I don't think they were wrong.
As is proved at the end of the 3rd series, The Silver Chair, when we see young Caspian a year older, and he's very good bridge. You believe he's going to turn into, or he has retrospectively turned into Samuel West when he's a few years older.
Yes, I said Timothy West a minute ago, which was wrong. That's his dad. So sorry about that.
Prunella Scales is his mum, as we know, because they were married. They are married.
But anyway, I also think the boy with the French name is a very articulate, or was a very articulate young actor, and I do buy into him as a Narnian king, where you have to sort of speak a bit pretentiously and carry yourself like a royal of old, like King Arthur or something. He's got a young, innocent, yet very posh voice, so I think they did rather well there. And what has happened there is that he's the rightful king of Narnia from Telmarine ancestry, which they don't go into in the show at all, do they?
They don't. No, they're just humans in Narnia in the TV show, but they're supposed to be Telmarines, who they're sort of invaders, aren't they?
Yes, so you might think, well, why are there suddenly humans all over Narnia when it was such a huge deal and no one had ever seen one in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe? It's a bit of a plot hole in the books that C.S. Lewis makes up excuses for, to be honest, but the excuses are there if you want to read them.
I suppose that's one reason why so many hundreds or thousands of years have to have passed in Narnia before we get to Prince Caspian, so things can be radically different like that. The main reason, of course, being that the Narnian creatures and dwarfs and talking animals have had time to fade into obscurity and become legend, as it were. Which is not an unrelated issue to the Telmarines being around.
If you read The Magician's Nephew, where Aslan creates Narnia, because he's God, humans from our world are actually introduced into Narnia then, and the taxi driver and the washerwoman or something are made king and queen, so he's trying to introduce humans into that world in that way, but I can't tell you exactly how it works.
He does a lot of retrospective things that don't really fit in, doesn't he, in The Magician's Nephew? You look at it and then you try and match it up to the earlier published books. You think, well, C.S. Lewis, it doesn't make complete sense, and you're trying to have it all your own way.
So then what happens anyway is that King Miraz, Caspian's evil uncle, Lord Protector, father's brother sort of person, who's just sort of trying to sneak being king himself, has a son, or his wife has a son actually, which means that Caspian needs to die, which means that he needs to go and escape into the woods and find Truffle Hunter the Badger and Knickerbrick and Trumpkin the Dwarfs and some other people like that, and get together an army and fight Miraz and gain his rightful place on the throne of Narnia. And in order to do this, they blow Susan's magic horn and summon the 4 children back from our world to help. So that's the plot, and it's quite quick in just 2 episodes, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot they squeeze in. I remember the first time we watched the DVD, all the stuff with Miraz being betrayed by 2 of his own soldiers, one of them's Joe McGann from The Upper Hand, went completely over my head. I didn't think I really understood what was going on there until I'd actually watched the 2008 film adaptation. It's not too easy to get into, I think, as it is so condensed. But then it's fairly well done for what it is anyway. And one very good bit, actually, in the second episode of Prince Caspian is where they bring back Barbara Kellerman and Martin Stone as the hag and the werewolf, as it were. And we get some ambiguity there about the White Witch, how much she was an individual entity, or if she's just kind of an embodiment of evil that can be brought back in other ways, in other witches, in this hag, in the Green Lady in the silver chair, and there's less ambiguity about that in the films.
God, isn't there just? I remember when I read that, before I'd seen any of the adaptations or remembered seeing them, thinking that maybe the hag was trying to restore herself. It would, if the spell had worked, got finished, would have been revealed that she was the White Witch, which I think is a very valid interpretation and completely nullified, obliterated by the way they do it in the film. There's a lot to slag off in the films.
That's one bit with the hag and the wolfman where I am reminded of and start talking about temptation by evil, which is a big religious biblical theme, of course, and you get it all through this Narnia stuff. It's in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe too. Edmund is tempted by evil and almost succumbs to it.
He stops succumbing to it when she starts being nasty to him, really, doesn't she? And
yes.
Not feeding him proper food and threatening to kill him.
And when people are going to Knickerbrick is wanting to give in to the temptation of evil there for a quick fix rather than relying on the kings and queens, the divine right of kings, Aslan relying on what's good and right. Knickerbrick, of course, has to die for that, and so does the evil as well. It's a recurring theme, and it's done rather well.
As you were saying, they then come out of Narnia and back to our world, and then the same day, Edmund and Lucy, who according to Aslan are still young enough to go to Narnia, go back there again, not to Narnia itself, but to a ship on the sea in the Narnia universe, and have their next adventure, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And by the end of that, they're too old as well.
Yes, so they're just young enough to still go in by about 4 weeks. So Peter and Susan overall were older when they became too old than Lucy and Edmund were. It doesn't really make sense though, but there we are.
I guess Aslan knows whether there's going to be any more use for them when they're still old enough, which would come into his decision. But anyway, I enjoyed reading The Voyage of the Dawn Treader more than Prince Caspian, and I thought, oh, it's nearly as good as The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Perhaps it's even as good, because I enjoyed the sea voyage, sailing adventure, doing things on different islands, discovering people and creatures and situations and dangers. and then getting in the ship and going off and doing it again, sort of like in the Adventures of Sinbad. And then I thought it dropped off at the end. It gets really weird at the end and a bit boring, and that's because he's getting a bit too much bogged down in the religious symbolism and not nicely marrying it together with adventures the children are going to find engaging.
The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the series, certainly, I'm not sure about the book, seems very unsure of where it should end. It feels like it's going to end, and then, oh no, they're going to go on and do something else, even though there's no more islands. Oh, it must be ending now, here's all lilies on the water. Oh no, they've come out the other side. And then Aslan turns up and everyone goes home, or whatever, wherever he wants them to go. It's structurally not as strong as it could be. I think my favourite bit of the Dawn Treader, certainly in the TV version, is the Duffel Pods. They're rather fun, and it's rather intriguing to know what's going on this island with these invisible giants, as they seem to be, but then they turn out to be something completely different.
Yes, that is a very good bit in the book. It's possibly the bit I find the most memorable.
And of course the gold water is very interesting, the water that makes things beautiful gold. It's a horrible irony. Water is supposed to give life, and that's what one of the Narnian lords was hoping it would do, but instead it takes away life by turning you into gold, and tempts people with evil by clouding their minds with greed. So there's some nice irony in there, whether you're religious or not.
And what do they say about that Narnian lord who's a gold statue in the water in the film? They go, oh, it must have fallen in. That takes away a huge amount. It seems like such a little thing, but it takes a huge amount away not to imply that he touched the water or got into the water of his own accord. I mean, you can fall into any water and drown or get tangled up in the weeds or die in some way. Makes it seem like a much less horrible accident.
It's funny when Caspian says, I'm going to keep this pool for myself and I'm not going to tell anyone it's here and nobody's going to find out and all the gold will be mine and I'm going to call the island Goldwater Island. We're like, yes, nobody will guess how you're getting all the gold there, will they? Again, temptation by evil is eventually resisted there.
Yes, and it's not even somebody evil saying, oh, come and be evil. It's the evil within him.
Oh, that's very interesting. Edmund is susceptible to it as well. I think Lucy manages to talk him round, doesn't she, being so pure?
I've never seen such greed, she says. I always like the line Edmund says to Caspian, I am not your subject, which again is directly out of the book. Something else they mess up in the film. They're all like, oh, everyone's always telling me what to do, you're just like Peter, which is completely missing the point, getting hung up on something they should have finished with a long time ago, and I'm already getting ranty about the film. Very, very bad film, that one. But anyway, Caspian's also saying he's going to keep the island a secret, isn't he? I think he's saying it's only going to be Goldwater Island to those who are privy to it, and no one can come near. But then, of course, that would start all sorts of wars and things, people wanting to know what he's hiding and going to look for it themselves.
It's quite lazy in some ways at the end, where they're like, well, we've accounted for 4 Narnian lords, only 3 more to find. You think, oh, well, only 20 minutes left on the counter. And then they go to the next island, and, oh, there they are, all 3 of them at this table. And that's where things start to get very weird indeed.
Yes, they come onto this island, you think, okay, this is fine, this is what's been happening in the whole story. They find the 3 Narnian lords asleep round this enchanted table, and you think, all right then, that makes sense. Then this blonde lady turns up and starts talking about the magic of the table, and you think, okay, more or less consistent with what's been going on. And then Geoffrey Bayldon turns up and starts talking, absolute nonsense about his life cycle as a star. And that's where it starts to get really weird. And they get sent off to sail as far east as they possibly can without falling over the edge of the world, and even though it's very well established by C.S. Lewis's time that the world is round, I don't think he likes that idea very much, and he's adamant that the world of Narnia is flat. And what they do at the edge of the world is they send Reepicheep, who we'll talk about more in a moment, to sail over the edge in his coracle, because in the far east lies Aslan's country. But what they actually mean is that you fall off the edge of the world and die and go to heaven.
They represent it on the BBC by having him kind of go up proper waterfall into Aslan's country rather than off the edge of the world. It seems more glorious and less dangerous.
Yes, C.S. Lewis meant, I'm sure, that he actually physically died, but perhaps they thought that wouldn't be quite so nice for the television. When I read Prince Caspian, in which Rupert Cheap is introduced, I thought, God, he's annoying. And when I read The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, I thought, he's still annoying. He's a mouse, by the way, in case that's not obvious. And when I saw the BBC adaptation, I thought, oh, it's Warwick Davis. I like Warwick Davis. Unfortunately, he's playing an annoying character. He's very good at playing Rupert Cheap as he is in the book, quite annoying. When I watched Prince Caspian the film, I knew that Eddie Izzard was going to be Rupert Cheap, and I thought, the voice of Rupert Cheap anyway, and I thought, oh, he's got that off the back of Five Children and It, which is worse than Grease 2, worse than Space Jam, worse than The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and one of the very bad things about it, which is all of them, one of them is Eddie Izzard as the Sammy-Head. So I was already prejudiced against him as Rupert Cheap, and yes, he was annoying. Then in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, he was recast, and he was Simon Pegg. And funnily enough, I think Simon Pegg as Rupert Cheap is one of the saving graces, if not the saving grace, of that film.
So really, that second series of Narnia is the weakest of the three by quite some way. One big aspect of it that we haven't talked about is Eustace, who's played by David Thwaites.
And what was he saying that Lucy and Edmund, their actors, did to him for a joke?
Nicking his camera, because he's the new boy. Poor old David. And the big thing, well, Eustace has a big personal journey in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and the big turning point, I suppose, is when he turns into a dragon.
As you do.
And Aslan helps him to turn back and shed his bad qualities as he sheds the scales of the dragon. And there's a bit of ambiguity on that island about how the Narnian lord, whose bits and bobs and armour they find there, did actually die. Could it be he was eaten by the old dragon that Eustace sees dying? Could it be that he was the old dragon that Eustace sees dying? I like to think that he was. He was tempted by evil and succumbed to it and didn't find a way back.
I remember thinking when I read the book, well, if they're supposed to be the friends of Caspian the Ninth, the current King Caspian's father, and they're supposed to be good Narnian lords who were banished for their loyalty, perhaps he's not been turned into a dragon by greed. But of course, if you're on your own on this island for a long time going mad and then you find some treasure, you could easily succumb, couldn't you?
Nice bit of ambiguity there.
Another thing they arse up in the film, they find the charred remains of the Narnian lord, and they're like, oh, well, the dragon definitely killed him then.
God, all the ambiguity's gone. So they set out to find 7 lords anyway, so I guess they discover that 2 of them are dead, and they eventually return with 5 of them. Although I think the first one is going to stay on the lone island, isn't he, and be Caspian's governor there. They bring back the other 4, the 3 from Aslan's table and the one who was trapped in his own nightmares for several years, and give them some kind of rehabilitation in Narnia before they come back onto Caspian's council, as it were.
They tell us in the narrative, I can't remember how C.S. Lewis tells us in the book, but they show us some images and like, oh yes, this is what's going to happen next, everything's going to be fine, Caspian's going to marry the daughter of the star and everyone's going to go home and be happy because the story's ended, we don't get to really see any of that. Edmund, Lucy and Eustace go home while they're still on the eastern edge of the world. So that's all I want to say about Series 2, I think. Let's talk about Series 3, which is The Silver Chair, which I think is the only one of the other 6 Chronicles of Narnia that's as good as The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And I think it is my favourite of the 3 series. One reason is that I like the story. I already enjoyed it from the book. I think it's a very good one. One reason is I think perhaps the 2 children I find the most engaging, and another reason is Tom Baker as Puddleglum.
I think I would definitely say it's my favourite of the 3 series, and of course by process of elimination it has to contain my second of 2 favourite passages of BBC Narnia, which I'll talk about at the end of the analysis of the series.
The plot of this story is that Eustace is recalled to Narnia along with his school friend Jill because there is a specific task that Aslan wants them to do. I think it's the only time, isn't it, where there's something really, really specific and only they can do it and they don't just sort of turn up to help, if you see the difference. And the thing that they have to do is find Caspian's missing son, Prince Rillian, before Caspian dies. The idea is that Aslan will tell them, not exactly what they have to do, I'll give them obscure signs to look for, but by various circumstances Eustace is lost and prematurely sent to Narnia itself rather than this cliff near Narnia, so only Jill gets to hear the signs from Aslan and speak to him. What's quite amusing is how much Aslan hates her, isn't it?
He absolutely hates Jill. Child, and you think, oh, he's going to say something reassuring or helpful, and he goes, silence! Every time he turns up, he has a go at Jill. He doesn't like her at all.
She is lamenting that it's her fault Eustace isn't there to hear the signs, because she was messing about and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you have to read the book or watch it to know exactly what I mean, but you think, yes, Aslan's going to say something quite nice, like, well, just worry about the next bit now. He does not confirm or deny when you are slagging yourself off and saying, oh, I've done this wrong and I've done that one. That's something C.S. Lewis explicitly points out when Peter is saying it's partly my fault that Edmund went wrong. So you wouldn't expect him to say something like, never mind, it's okay, don't worry about it, but just something about what she can do next to improve. But no, just silence.
I like Big Mick returning as Trumpkin in the silver chair. He's old and deaf now. He mishears Eustace's name as Eustace. If he's Eustace, we don't want him here. That always makes us laugh.
That is an improvement on one of C.S. Lewis's lines. He just makes him say something like, I dare say he is useless. Although he doesn't necessarily have the northern accent in the book.
I like Warwick Davis in a different role now as Glimfeather the Owl. What a to-do, what to do. Very well done, very owly done. Mike Edmonds from Maid Marian and Her Merry Men fame doesn't really do anything owlish to bring the character of Mr. Owl to life.
To be fair, his function is mostly a narrator, so perhaps they thought, he and the director, that we'd like an ordinary human voice to tell us the history of what happened to Prince Rillian so it doesn't get too complicated.
Which would be fair enough. And of course, we all love Tom Baker, but then of Doctor Who fame, and now as well, but he's done other things since, but quite, well, not that long after Doctor Who, coming off the back of Doctor Who, he's playing Puddleglum. And what a fantastic job he does with his overly pessimistic lines and his standing up to the Green Lady in the face of evil and keeping Jill and Eustace on track. They'd absolutely fail to death without him. I was saying when we were watching it, they only meet him because they've missed the first sign, which is that Eustace is supposed to go to Caspian to get help so that their mission to find Rillian would be endorsed by Caspian. And then Puddleglum's only brought into the adventure because the owls take them to him because they've messed up their first step. But then I was wondering, I wonder if Caspian would have sent Puddleglum with them anyway, a loyal marshwiggle who knows the territory well. So perhaps things were back on track in God's plan anyway.
You couldn't get any better help than Puddleglum.
No, he does everything for them, especially in the TV show. I think they're a bit more useful in the book as far as I remember, Jill and Eustace.
I can't really recall. The problem is with his pessimism that he says, we won't be able to light a fire because the wood's wet and you won't like the eel stew and I won't catch any eels anyway. So when he is pointing out something that's astute, they've come to disregard his advice as just being overly pessimistic, which is mostly on them, not paying attention and looking for the signs. But it is a bit of an issue as a guide. My favourite bit in the whole of the series and the books, I think, is where they first meet Puddleglum and he's saying all those things. And you could light a fire. Where shall we light it? You could light it inside, but then we'd all get smoke in our eyes. Or you could light it outside, but then the rain would come down and put it out. We rather suspect, don't we, that the idea was given to C.S. Lewis by someone who just found a problem in everything. because in some ways rings true, and you feel that he's a very believable character, and that's why he's funny.
Yes, definitely the funniest passage of the series, I think. The early stages with Puddleglum.
And they do like the eel stew. Oh yes, you like it now, but I disagree with you. All that kind of thing. It's very funny.
I like the whole sequence with the giants at Harfang, and that's interesting in that it's temptation by evil. The Green Lady sending them there with promises of warm fires and good food, and of course it's into the jaws of death, into the jaws of being eaten for the autumn feast. Puddleglum says they shouldn't go there. They should be following the signs, so it all fits together very well.
I think an Aslan's signs about staying with giants.
And it's very cleverly shot, all that stuff around Haddon Hall, which is doubling up as Harfang. And you believe it's a giant castle with giants in it, even when the superimposed smaller Eustace, Puddleglum and Jill aren't in shot, because of the camera angles they do, and the ingrained establishment of it as a giant palace. It's just completely believable and flows and fits together very well.
Yes, brilliant. Of course, modern people would probably be very scornful of the effects when the humans / Marshwiggle and the giants are together, and they have to try and make them look different sizes, but really, you couldn't do any better. CBBC in those days.
And it perfectly establishes the effect they're going for and lets us know what's supposed to be going on, and like the pantomime feel with the big beaver costumes and things, it doesn't matter that it doesn't look 100% realistic. It's a televisual effect very well achieved.
So then what happens is obviously they escape from the giants who want to eat them, and they have to go underground where someone is being held under the Green Lady's spell.
The casting of Barbara Kellerman as the Green Lady is very good because it adds to, again, the ambiguity of the witch. She is... Well, Puddleglum says she's probably from the same ilk as the White Witch. Is she the same person, the same entity, the same creature as the White Witch? Possibly. Certainly, they're both embodiments of evil.
I seem to remember C.S. Lewis very much implies that they might be the same exact witch. I always like to think she is. And of course, she's trying to take over Narnia with Rillian's blood claim. I've just given it away, haven't I? It's Prince Rillian she has down there, but we don't know that. In the book, we've never seen him, and we don't see him with our actual physical face recognition when we meet him down there in the book either. But in the TV show, we've seen him in flashback, so obviously he needs to have on a mask so we won't recognise him. And I think Jake's other most successful passage has got to do with them finding out who he is.
You're absolutely right. My other most successful passage is everything from where they meet Rillian in the underworld, the Green Lady's evil underground kingdom, which is rather like hell, up to the bit where he is released from the silver chair, which holds him captive, and revealed to be Prince Rillian, and you're like, oh, that's what was going on. It's very effectively done, because obviously we know that the masked man is the Green Lady's ally, accomplice, potentially lover. She certainly plans to make it that way. But he's perfectly nice to them. He's perfectly polite to them while they're down in Underland. And when he's warning them that they mustn't let him dissuade them when he's trapped in the silver chair, his mind isn't his own, he'll beg them to release him, they mustn't do it or he'll go mad and kill them. You think, oh yes, right, I have absolutely no reason to disbelieve this. And it's established in the mind of the viewer when one doesn't know the secret that yes, they definitely must not release it from the silver chair, and it would be terribly dangerous to do so. And I think it's quite believable that the gang, Jill and Puddleglum and Eustace, go in with that attitude. But then, of course, we've all forgotten, haven't we, the final sign. Someone will ask you to do something in the name of Aslan, and this you must do. And when Aslan originally tells Jill that in episode 1, by the way, he actually specifically says, you will know Prince Rillian by the fact that he'll ask you to do something in my name, and this you must do. But by the time we get to episode 5, we just remember that someone's going to ask them to do something in the name of Aslan. and this they must do. So we're in the frame of mind where, they mustn't let him out of the chair, and it seems like indeed his mind has gone. He's been very threatening. Beware, I shall be your mortal enemy. I shall break out of this chair and kill you. And then the spanner gets thrown in the works when he begs them to release him in the name of the great lion of Aslan himself. And you think, whoa, and it hits you when you don't know the secret. That is exciting. And as Puddleglum says, again, it's Jill and Eustace who demur, and as Puddleglum says, we have to do it then. Don't ignore another of the signs, for goodness sake. And one bit I prefer in the book is where it says Scrub and Puddleglum, Eustace, as I prefer to call him, and Puddleglum, took their swords and cut the bonds in the chair. And I think, yes, that's better than just having Tom Baker go around and undo all the buckles and things on the silver chair. It doesn't look strong enough to really hold him in his mad frenzy on the television. So that's one thing the BBC has let us down with slightly, but never mind, because the intention and the effect is still there. Where he is released from the silver chair, and it's like, what's he gonna do? And then the removal of the mask is very effective, actually. You don't need it in the book, of course, because we wouldn't have recognised his face because we can't see it, because it's words. But the removal of the mask on the television is very effective, and he shakes out the hair, and you think, that's Prince Brilliant from the flashbacks. That's what's going on. So there we are, my second really effective passage of BBC Narnia.
Of course, before he does that, he does start going mad and running around waving his sword and going, ah! But that's because he's going to smash up the silver chair, and that's taken out of the book. And in that scene, very judicious use of music as well, I think. They've got this tense music going on, and then he's saying the great lion, Aslan himself, and it just, stops. And you get close up on their reaction, whoa, he said Aslan.
Nice crescendo there.
Sometimes I object to non-diegetic music telling us how we're supposed to feel, but if you're genuinely feeling it by other things that they've done to achieve the effects, then it can work very well indeed. And I did know the secret, which is why you keep saying it, isn't it? Because I'd read the book quite recently, actually. I was reading them and I was writing my dissertation on them for my bachelor's degree, comparing them to Harry Potter. I've probably written about the underworld being like hell, just like the Slytherin common room in the dungeon and all that kind of thing. But anyway, I am glad I read the book first, because I think that scene is equally effective, or in its own way effective, in the book.
And the bit that follows on is very good as well, confrontation with the Green Lady, and again it's Puddleglum who comes through and says, look, we're not going to succumb to your temptation, to your lies, because even if Aslan, Narnia, subtext, even if God isn't true, it's a lot more nice, a lot more interesting than the alternative, so let's go with it. And that's the bit you can cite as C.S. Lewis acknowledging, okay, yes, it may all be a load of crap, really, but I like it.
He was a convert, C.S. Lewis, which is quite interesting. He had once been an atheist.
Oh, no wonder he's so definite about it then.
So that's the BBC TV series, which, in my opinion and Jake's opinion, is very, very, very good. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Don't want to put words in your mouth, but I do need to talk a bit more about the films. I don't know if I want to, but I need to. When I saw The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, I went to see it in the cinema because I like the book, and I could see from the trailers that this adaptation looked amazing, and that's really not a problem in itself. The problem with making things look fantastic is if it's at the expense of the script being any good and the interpretation being any good.
Like we said last week, the Iron Giant didn't have that problem, but the Narnia films go the other way and do have that problem.
Yes, now, I watched The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the movie, recently, and I was hoping to enjoy it more than I did. When I saw it in the cinema, I did overall quite like it. It had been a long time since I'd read the book, so even though I knew the story, I didn't know, or I didn't remember what it was supposed to be like. And it does tell the story. And I spotted the bits that obviously were wrong. I spotted that Jim Broadbent as the professor wasn't saying exactly the right things to Peter and Susan when they were saying they were worried Lucy's gone mad. I noticed that they stuck in this scene with Tumnus in the dungeon with manacles on him and the witch coming along to get Edmund and go and be evil with him and saying to him, to Tumnus, do you know why you're here? And Tumnus going, because I believe in a free America, I mean Narnia, and all that kind of thing. And I noticed that Peter didn't just kill Morgrim like he's supposed to. They had to have this massive action sequence with the melting river / waterfall, and Morgrim's going, you can't kill me, you don't have it in you. He doesn't kill him, and then he has to do it later, and he still doesn't really do it properly, and he don't want to kill him. And Morgrim pretty much just kind of jumps on Peter's sword, and you think, oh, come on, Peter doesn't have to be a wuss just because modern values nowadays tend to go for, well, we don't just kill people just like that, but neither did Peter in the book. He killed the wolf that was attacking his sisters and his allies. So that was annoying. I suppose those are the only things I really noticed when I first watched it. But then I watched it again recently, and, there is more. I noticed for the first time how the cast isn't really that good, and they're so keen. They love Tilda Swinton, don't they? The White Witch.
Yeah.
And after they'd made The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, there was talk, wasn't there, of making The Magician's Nephew.
Yes, they originally said it was going to be The Magician's Nephew next.
Which would have Tilda Swinton all over it, because unambiguously her character, Jadis, the White Witch, is in The Magician's Nephew, and she's in it a lot. And then that's when they stopped.
And we said, but they should definitely make the Silver Chair next, because what about Will Poulter as Eustace? They'll need to do it while he's still reasonably young. But then they didn't make that either anyway.
There's talk of making it soon, and they're simply going to have to get someone else to play Eustace if they do that, which is a shame.
Yes, because Will Poulter's a very good young actor, but he's not that young anymore. They keep saying, oh yes, it's definitely coming now, the Silver Chair, but I'll believe it when I see it. I think he's about to turn 24 from when I looked him up the other week, Will Poulter, so yeah, they really can't get away with that.
They can't. But anyway, what else is wrong with The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe? Tilda Swinton, I'm not that keen on her. I mean, she's fine, she says the lines, she does it in the pretentious way the director wants, but she just doesn't grab me.
No Barbara Kellerman.
Ray Winstone as Beaver. I can see that Hollywood would absolutely love the Cockney accent. I'm sorry, I'm not that keen on Ray Winstone. I've seen him playing Henry VIII, and he wasn't very good at that, and Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of What's It Street?
Fleet Street.
And I wasn't too keen on that. I mean, he does everything the same. The thing that he's done that I think he does best is being an abusive dad shouting at a football referee at a children's football match for a Don't Abuse the Referee awareness campaign. But he says the lines, just like Tilda Swinton, as Beaver, and he says them like this in his Cockney accent. And the lines are not what C.S. Lewis wrote, they're what the adapters think the modern audience is going to find amusing. 4 people wrote the screenplay. Was one of them British? I don't think so. The script is absolutely riddled with not exactly Americanisms. Jake was explaining to me when he'd watched an episode of Poirot recently. Not exactly Americanisms, but things that a British person would probably phrase differently. Although cranky is an Americanism, isn't it?
They do detract, I find, from Poirot and Narnia Americanisms.
One of them had spotted that even if a British child nowadays might say, I guess I could bring them, someone who had been evacuated from London during the Second World War would say, I suppose. So that's very annoying and distracting. Beaver gets pretty cranky when he's hungry, says Dawn French as Mrs. Beaver. I'm cranky now, says Ray Winstone. And you think, oh, come on, Cockneys, don't say that. So that's annoying. I'm feeling very annoyed about this film, as you can tell. Again, Dawn French. I love Dawn French. I think she's excellent, but they don't really give her very much to do. She comes out nagging Beaver. Oh, where have you been? And you never do this, and you haven't done that. And stereotypical nagging wife. That's not a very good interpretation. I mentioned Tumnus earlier. James McAvoy. We've spoken about him before, haven't we? And we've said he's only ever adequate.
God knows why. He's not in the Iron Giant.
It was a little while ago. I'm struggling myself to remember what he's actually in, that we said he's only ever adequate. Oh well. When he's meeting Lucy, Georgie Henley as Lucy, I find that scene very forced. She's been picked for her speech impediment, the wardrobe in the spare room, and her sort of big teeth and freckles, and she looks like the kind of child Hollywood likes. English children certainly don't comfort people or fawns who are crying by saying hey hey at them. And I found I could really tell she was acting. She's only young. Lucy's 8. I'm not sure. She's probably a couple of years older than that. I really felt like James McAvoy was acting in that scene. I didn't buy into it at all. Then who have you got? Skandar Keynes as Edmund. I mean, he's okay. He's the one who says, I guess I could bring them. He doesn't think himself of fixing the Americanisms because he's just a child. He doesn't have a lot of confidence. He does what the director tells him.
You have to be a Maggie Smith or Alan Rickman to fix Americanism yourself, as we know from Harry Potter.
Yes, we don't know for sure that they did that, but given that they don't say any and everybody else does, you can assume that they had some and they fixed them.
Yeah, I think definitely.
Of course, one thing they like about Georgie Henley is that she can quite clearly cry on cue. There's a bit in the outtakes where they're getting ready to do a scene, and she says, do you want me to cry for this, Andrew? Susan is played by Anna Popplewell, and I think that they noticed when adapting the book Susan doesn't really have any character. She's just there to make up the numbers. We better give her some character. So what do? They make her into a horrible nag, always having a go at Peter, telling him he's handling the young ones incorrectly. And constantly saying, oh no, we can't help, we can't save Narnia, we have to leave, we have to go home. Very annoying. What they do with her is they make her more of a modern woman, which is fine and right for a modern film. I think she's, unlike Peter, quite happy to cut people down with her bow and arrows. Father Christmas, when he's giving her those, doesn't say battles are ugly affairs when women fight. He just says battles are ugly affairs, and it's very much implied that Susan will fight, although she doesn't get to because she's busy watching Aslan getting killed.
Temporarily.
William Moseley as Peter. Going to be a little bit rude about William Moseley and say that I found him particularly annoying even when I was watching the film in the cinema and quite enjoying it, but I don't think that's his fault. It's the material he gets to work with. It's what they do to Peter's character. And he keeps saying, oh, we need to go home. And then later on, when they're getting ready to fight the battle the next morning, he's still saying, oh, you need to go home, I'll do it by myself. And Lucy says, don't be stupid, Peter, they need us, all 4 of us. And as I said, they were making him be a complete wuss about killing an evil wolf. So that's it. That's why the film is really very annoying.
I'm sure they didn't mean to wait originally another 3 years before making Prince Caspian, but they did. And I enjoyed the trip to Kingston upon Thames that we had to watch it in the cinema, but actually, I don't feel I want to watch it now.
I haven't watched that one recently, but I will because I'm watching more, but I won't enjoy it. Caspian isn't a child, which I always thought was fundamentally wrong. It's a children's adventure series about the innocence of children and the righteousness of what they're doing, and Prince Caspian, when he's gaining his rightful place as King of Narnia, ought to be a child. He's not. He's a grown-up, sexy man called Ben Bonds. And he starts trying to have a ship with Susan, who, of course, has to go back to our world forever. It's very unnecessary, very Hollywood.
What's interesting about that film is it has Warwick Davis as Knickerbrick, the evil dwarf. So he's the only person so far to have appeared in the BBC Narnia, and the films Narnia, and Star Wars, and Harry Potter, and Leprechaun.
Trumpkin is played by somebody else, and I've talked about how they mess about with the dialogue, try and make jokes out of it, saying the prophecy doesn't really rhyme and things like that. And one thing they do is make Trumpkin say they're being patronising when they're referring to him as the DLF, dear little friend, totally having missed the point when they read the book, which presumably they bothered to do or they wouldn't know the basic story, where Trumpkin doesn't believe that these children he's gone to collect are the King and Queen of Narnia and refers to them as dear little friends. so they're just getting back at him there. But, it misses a lot of points. I've already talked about the let's try and resurrect the witch scene, and what they do there is they bring back Tilda Swinton, who they absolutely love, and there's this sort of CG bird parrot woman kind of thing being the hag, coming and saying, yes, I'm going to resurrect the White Witch, and Tilda Swinton starts appearing, totally separate entity from this bird hag woman thing. So, they've taken that totally at face value. Yes, we're going to resurrect the witch just as she was. So, what's the point of a hag coming to do it, and not as she ought to be, being full of witches are really powerful and you can always bring them back? There's just nothing to it.
That's why we think they probably might not cast her as the Green Lady if they do make the Silverchair, which they really should do for ambiguity and is it the same witch. They probably want to very much make them two separate characters. And just like in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, they'll probably find a way to bring Tilda Swinton back as the White Witch in some kind of vision.
Yes, I was wondering about that, because of course Edmund isn't in the Silverchair, so how will they do it? They can't do what they did in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where they make up a load of absolute crap and stick Tilda Swinton in there for Edmund to be tempted by her again, or remember, or feel guilty, or whatever he was supposed to be feeling. But I'll talk about the changes they made to the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. They've got all these excuses. Oh yes, it was too episodic for a film.
That's nonsense.
Yes, well, listen, filmmakers. C.S. Lewis himself has the answer to that. They're taking this voyage, going to one island after the other, having different adventures in order to find the Narnian lords, and then they find them. They say, whoops, he's dead, or let's take him home, or let's leave you here to govern the Lone Islands justly in my name, whatever's appropriate. No, you don't need to collect all their swords and put them in a magic circle or something. No, there doesn't need to be an evil mist that comes and eats people. And I can't remember what they said the point of that was, but whatever it was, I'm sure it didn't make any sense. And what did I say about that change? I said it was three things: unnecessary, contrived, and detrimental.
And they could get away with any two of those things, but all three, that just makes it a bad film.
And as for the islands themselves, we've talked about the ambiguity being lost. Yes, he was definitely killed by the dragon. He must have fallen in. That's losing something that we've talked about already. Ooh, you're just like Peter. I want to be in charge. I want to be the older brother. Mention that. Lucy in the book and the CBBC adaptation has a moment of weakness where she wants to be as pretty as Susan. That's a massive, huge, ongoing, simmering jealousy that gives her evil visions and stuff in the film that's completely unnecessary. And that's a lot of what I don't like about the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. What I do like, as I said, Simon Pegg as Reepicheep for some reason. I can't really remember now, but I do remember quite enjoying him. Will Poulter as Eustace, he's good, isn't he?
I hope that wasn't the British consul.
Yes.
He has some crap to work with, but he does it very well.
That's the best bit in the whole film, I think. And we have mentioned Liam Neeson as Aslan, and I think even including Simon Pegg and Will Poulter, he's the best thing in any of the films. I like Liam Neeson as Aslan. Obviously, with the computer animation, they can make him look really good and really realistic, although it did strike me when I was watching it. Nowadays, they could make it look a bit more like he was really real and really there.
I always thought they completely overdid the violence of the stone table scene just because they could with their CG Aslan as well. I liked the more understated version from the BBC. Equally, do it understated and effective with CG.
I quite like that scene in the film, although Tilda Swinton comes along and makes it just very average. I think Liam Neeson with his voice and the animation that they do on Aslan does justice to the character. I'm not looking at it from a religious point of view, goodness knows if people think he does justice to God, but I think as an interpretation of C.S. Lewis's Aslan, the films are pretty good, although they give him stupid lines. Everybody gets stupid lines, but he does get the best lines, I think. He doesn't say, children, children, why are you following me? Which I always think he should. He does, shouldn't you both be in bed? And I think that's a weird thing for God to say. But never mind. Speaking of the animation, obviously, when Eustace turns into the dragon, it's very easy to make him a CG dragon. It's so easy that he can pick up Edmund and fly around with him and show him that he's spelled out in fire, I am Eustace, which again takes away a huge amount. It means they can't have the scene where they're communicating with him on the beach and he's crying and Lucy's saying, let's ask him questions, let's get him to nod, are you someone enchanted, is to turn into a dragon. Obviously it's much easier to animate this CG dragon than it is to make a dragon costume and have people walk around in it like in the BBC adaptation. But apart from that bit I just mentioned with the overdoing it, I think that they animated the dragon very well. They gave him very good, very believable, very appropriate gestures and facial expressions, matched up fairly well to Will Poulter, perhaps. I don't know if they bothered that much about making us believe the dragon was actually the same actor, but certainly comes across very much as the same character.
I bet they did some motion capture on him to help with the animation and the expression.
I was just wondering about that, and I was wondering if they really could be bothered, but I hope they did, because that's quite a good idea. You know, it's easy to do, and they did it, and they didn't mess it up that time. So, I nearly said all three of the films have their moments. I'm struggling to think of a moment in Prince Caspian, actually. The funny thing is that Ben Barnes does this exotic accent to show he's a Telmaid in Prince Caspian, and then in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader he just talks like you and me. Well, I could probably rant about the films for quite a long time, especially if I watched Prince Caspian and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader again, but I haven't recently, so I don't have anything else specific to say, so let's leave it there.
I find I don't want to watch those films anymore, for all these reasons that Rosie's been talking about. I come away having watched the BBC one, I think, well, there we are, that's Narnia. I don't really want to sit and watch the three films and think how awful they are, because they don't really add anything to the Narnia experience.
Well, I've got them all on DVD for some reason. I've got The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe because I thought I liked it. I've got Prince Caspian because I thought I didn't mind it. And I've got The Voyage of the Dawn Treader because I wanted it for my collection before I'd actually seen it, and I never imagined it could be as bad as it was.
So it'd be interesting to see if they do make the Silver Chair, how much they mess it up, and whether I'll be able to stand to watch it more than once. So there's something possibly for a future update podcast. But I think that's the end of the Chronicles of Narnia for now, don't you?
Yes, I think so.
Join us next time for a podcast on the subject of BBC's fantastically edutaining series of programmes which come under the Look and Read moniker. Until then, thanks very much for listening today, and
good night out there.
Whatever you are.